Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Cloud Native Testing Podcast. I'm super thrilled for the first time in the podcast history to be joined by two fantastic guests. I have with me Dmitry, co-founder of Testkube, who is going to share immense wisdom, but I have someone even more prominent, Atul, who we've been working with for a long time. Atul, it's great to have you here. How are you?
Thanks a lot, Ole. Nice to see you, Dmitry, here, and happy to be here. Things have been going pretty well. Was occupied with KubeCon India last week, but happy to be discussing interesting things today.
Yeah, it's great to have you. And actually, when we prepared for this, we talked a little bit about your background, and I was like amazed to hear that you started off in manual QA, like the unsung heroes of testing, right? So I'd love to hear, because it's a great story, and you've come so far and doing amazing things right now in the cloud native community. But let's go back a little bit to your testing roots. So how did that start off? And
Sure, I think it's been quite an amazing journey. It's been a roller coaster ride. I was fresh out of college about just over a decade ago, and I joined one of the largest service companies in India and was part of a manual QA team. And back then, I was like, "What will I do being a manual QA?" I mean, that was the thought that I had when I was getting into the project. And interestingly, that project was around virtual desktops. So it was around virtualization already. I was already in touch with a little bit of cloud or virtualization, if I can say so. And the solution was more around, creating virtual desktops, VDIs for end users. So as part of my job, I was handed over an Excel sheet, and it had about 50 to 100 test cases, and I just had to go to the portal and create a new VDI and then go into the backend and check whether the storage was provisioned correctly or not, and whether the right CPU was given, so on and so forth. So just kept on marking pass and fail in those Excel sheets for a few months. Uh, I think one of the most interesting things that happened early on in the in that stint was it it was time for a major release sort of from the team, and I remember failing a test case because I found something to not be right. And that was my first experience where all the architects and developers came at one side, and I had my testing manager and myself. The typical it's a feature, not a bug sort of a debate. And we spent a few hours discussing, debating on it. And eventually the release didn't go through. And it didn't go through for good reasons because there apparently was an issue with how the storage was functioning. But then, yeah, I spent a few months doing that. But always I was interested in working with code, always wanted to write code in some way or the other. And eventually stumbled upon automation. And now I was actually writing scripts to do the same things which I was doing manually. So I did get to write code now, and that was proprietary on C sharp. So I moved from manual testing into C sharp, where now I was writing scripts, which were basically recreating my actions. So clicking on buttons, clicking on icons, validating what's happening, and then that led me to a different project where I was now building Android applications using C sharp. I did that for a couple of years, working with GPS, functionality, as well as a lot of locking unlocking mechanisms on Android. And after that, I transitioned into my current role as a developer advocate. And this role has been completely different from what I've been doing for the last decade, because now I'm focused more on cloud native tech, and especially, from not knowing what the entire landscape was, what Kubernetes was, what Docker was, getting into this for the last about 4 years. It's been interesting. And I think how the whole testing or QA phase helped me through this entire journey was, instead of just figuring out how to break things, I was now able to understand systems better because now I'm at the other end of building systems. So earlier, when I was just fresh out of college, the whole idea was, hey, let's just break this. Let's just go and see what happens. Usually getting into the edge cases. But over time, this entire shift from manual to automation to a developer, and now a developer advocacy, I think I've got a better sense of how systems function, what are the different points of failures. And I think anyone who has been into QA initially, who gets into development or similar roles, would naturally have better sense of how systems function. So I feel I have that edge among other folks I meet.
Yeah, I'm sure you do. I'm sure you can make an argument that all software engineers should start with testing, or at least do testing in some part of their career, just to be on the other side. But before we dive deeper, because I'd love to learn more about kind of that journey on moving to more cloud native applications. Just I know that in the testing community, the practice of manual testing or exploratory testing is still a very cornerstone of QA. How do you feel about that, and how do you see like the move to automation balancing still the need for manual testing or maybe exploratory testing? Maybe those are different things. What are your thoughts?
So I think automation definitely brings in a lot of velocity that is required. A lot of heavy lifting could be done using automation. There's no doubt about it. But then I think having the human in the loop or the exploratory part, like we discussed, is critical because that domain understanding is something that only you, me, or anyone who is building the system or part of the team would be able to understand better, right? I could write a lot of scripts, especially in this era of vibe coding. I could have AI generate test scripts for me, but it would still not have a complete context of what application needs to be tested or what infrastructure is on which infrastructure the application is deployed. And I think that's where it's very critical for all of us to be a part of the system because we do understand areas or places where AI or automation could completely fail and not give us the right result. So we need a good balance of it, but we definitely need people within the entire automation system.
And do you think, I mean, I don't want to jump to AI too quickly here, but it does seem like an obvious or like maybe a natural next step here is to have AI agents like test your system, not based on a script, but more based on an understanding of requirements, etc., and more dynamically performing actions. Have you seen any like ventures in that direction? Does that make sense to you, or how do you think AI fits into testing?
I think right now, if you see a lot of things are happening mainly on generating code uh, and maybe reviewing PRs. These are the two major areas that I've seen a lot of tools, a lot of things happening here. So a lot of developers are using AI to write codes, write scripts, and maybe even review code, review scripts, things like that. But when it comes to actually using AI for testing, I haven't seen a lot of use cases. Outside of especially what we have done with Testkube earlier, right? The few demos that we built. I think outside of that, I have not seen a lot of work that is happening in that area. And I think it's something that a lot of people need to still explore and understand what are the benefits that AI could bring in, especially into testing, because it has a complete understanding of your code base now. Obviously, domain is the second part, but it understands your code. It understands how the request would flow through different modules and different layers that you have. And with that knowledge in place, it can definitely have a good way to cover it, more functions, more utility. So basically, when you talk about test coverage, using AI will definitely help you cover a lot more surface when it comes to testing applications.
Specifically on that, do you think that as teams like embrace AI to generate more code and configuration, do you think that also puts pressure on doing more testing or more test automation to make sure that I'm sure that like generated code is reviewed by experts. Like any code, things can fall between the cracks. Maybe especially this early in AI, people are hoping for big velocity improvements and generating a lot of code to do things. How do you feel like, do you feel like there's a need for AI, a need for testing to be more scaled up as code is more generated with AI?
Interesting, because just a few weeks back, I wrote a post on LinkedIn, and that post was around this very discussion that we are having on, a lot of developers using AI to generate code. Imagine earlier, let's consider the time when AI wasn't there, right? We would have five developers writing code, raising five PRs. You had your pipeline in place, which was able to handle all of it. But now with the advent of AI agents who are writing code for us, you suddenly see that the entire thing has gone 10x. Previously, if five developers raised five PRs in a day, now you have 50 or 100 PRs coming in a day. At that velocity, when the code is being generated, but CI/CD pipelines kind of are the bottlenecks here because they have not yet scaled to handle the velocity at which things are thrown at it. They are still stuck with the 5 PRs, right? So definitely scaling is required, not only focused on testing, but even your entire CI pipeline that you have in place, because a lot more code is being generated at much faster pace, which our existing pipelines were not even built to handle, right? So we definitely need to address that bottleneck first, and then obviously, because once we handle that part of it, that now we have scaled our CIs, so it can handle a lot more code coming in. Testing can come in, and then that also needs to be scaled accordingly so that it is able to handle the number of changes that are coming in, basically addressing the velocity.
Yes, to me, it sounds like it's multiple dimensions. One is just being able to run tests more efficiently because you have more PRs and pull requests and changes coming in. But the other is also on coverage, like you were saying. How do we make sure all this code that is being generated is sufficiently tested, right? So the existing tests, we can run them a lot, but if they don't really cover the code, the stuff that's been generated, obviously things will still fall through the cracks there. So I think that'll be interesting. And you could, of course, I'm sure, use AI to generate code, to generate tests as well. But maybe there's a self bias there. How much do you trust the tests generated by AI? It'll be really interesting to see how this plays out. I think we're still very early, and people are obviously very enthusiastic about potential velocity gains. But it'll be interesting to see, as that settles maybe a little harder, how that does change pipelines and velocity over time.
Yes, in fact, just a few weeks back around at KubeCon, I had some discussions with a different set of people around, vibe coding and AI generating code and the whole security aspect of it as to, how do you actually trust the code that AI is generating? How do you validate, let's say you ask it to generate a script. It did, but then what's the image that it is using within the script that it created, right? From where is that image coming in? Or how is it generating the code? So a lot of software supply chain concepts coming in here, because that also will become critical, because earlier AI was just helping you, probably it is giving you some code that you're using. But how I see, maybe few years or maybe few months down the line, it would become an integral part of your entire software development life cycles. While you were, and both you and me are there writing code, now you have an AI agent sitting there and generating code. So the whole security aspect becomes equally more critical here as well.
And do you, going back a little bit to like you with cloud native and Kubernetes, so you've been going deeper and deeper into that community, and I guess one of my reflections has been over the last years that testing is still not very prominent. If you look at like the CNCF landscape, and if you go around the booths at KubeCon or the talks, testing is rarely like a headline topic, right? There's maybe one or two topics, and they're usually very low level. Do you have any thoughts on that, and what could be the reason of that?
I think, I mean, I might not have the exact answer to this, but then I completely agree to, what you said. We have been to a lot of KubeCons, and a lot more emphasis has been on observability. As and when you'll see a lot of booths, a lot of tools around observability, and now more of AI agents for sitting on top of observability solutions, that can help you figure out, what's going wrong. But I think, uh, a lot of times what's happening, especially when it comes to testing, is traditionally applications, I mean traditionally developers focused mainly on application functionality, which meant just your application, your database, maybe a couple of services here and there. Now with Kubernetes and cloud native coming into place, there are a lot of different pieces that are working all together right now. So you have your containers, your applications. You need to test how orchestration is happening, how networking is happening, policy, service mesh, a lot of different things that are happening. So
Mm.
I feel they are blinded by a lot of things, so that the focus remains only on their application, and this unfortunately takes a backseat. But then eventually it actually comes to forefront when things break down. That's when they realize the value of testing everything that is possible. Not just load testing your application, right? Not just checking the functionality or just checking the checkout functionality of your e-commerce application, right? You need to check how the network is being handled by your service mesh, or we need to understand how your containers are being provisioned on the infrastructure, right? So I feel there is a bit of blindness, I would say. I don't know if that's the right word, but then a lot of focus is right on the applications, whether they function well or not, while the underneath, the whole ecosystem is still a little bit untouched. how I've seen it. And I think that's where, uh, you know, we need to talk more about why this is required. Why testing has to be a critical part, since your infrastructure has completely changed. You have a lot more moving parts over here, and everyone talking about shifting left. Everyone talks about platform engineering. You want to reduce cost of fixing bugs at the end, bring it to the front. I think a lot more awareness, a lot more things need to be done to talk about the effects of not testing things at an earlier stage, or not doing a comprehensive testing of your application at the infra as well as the infra. And I think once we get that piece out there, I'm sure this is going to pick up amongst the overall community as well.
No, I mean, I can definitely see the Kubernetes and cloud native is more about operations and operate infrastructure than it, and testing is maybe more in the application domain, like you were saying. You'd say, so if you want to talk about testing, well, then you go to a developer conference or like a different part of the life cycle. But at least from what we can see, and I think what you're also alluding to, there is a big need, especially as infrastructure as code part of cloud native to test infrastructure. So infrastructure testing is a pretty big thing from what we can see. It's security, obviously, and observability is also kind of leads to testing or troubleshooting and quality. So it feels like, while I think I'd be hoping for too much to say that, that there's like half of the booths at KubeCon about testing. That's obviously not going to happen, but it feels like it could be something that is more top of mind and talked about and kind of in this context. I mean, there are several areas, of course, where it is interesting. I think you look at ephemeral environment provisioning, which is something that's usually used for testing. So that's something where it usually comes up. So I'm not saying it's not there at all. I just got obviously, we at TestCube would love to talk more about testing. So some self bias here, of course, as well.
No, I completely, echo that. In fact, again, as part of KubeCons, I've had discussions with folks who are in the QA and testing side of things, and they are still, not leveraging Kubernetes or cloud native tech for testing, which with TestCube or all of us have seen, or are actually using it. They are still stuck in the traditional way of using it. So whether it's load testing, whether it's API testing, they're still stuck in the past, and they are not leveraging Kubernetes itself. So I think that's when I just told them that, hey, why don't you just go back and see if Kubernetes can actually help you to improve your testing itself, right? As an infra tool, as an orchestrator in this case. So I think that there is a fair chunk of people or organizations who are still not aware of the benefits that they can get from Kubernetes or cloud native when it comes to testing, running their testing infra over here. I think that is one area which I would probably want to discuss with a lot more folks I meet from testing, because I've seen a lot of benefits myself, so even whether it was working with other clients or just experimenting things, right? So I would definitely would discuss more as and when I get more opportunity to talk, raise more awareness that how this can be helpful as your infrastructure where you can run your testing on top of it.
Yeah, and I think and to your point, it'll take time. I think also as people are moving maybe more to a cloud native way of delivering software, so it's not more just a monolithic CI/CD pipeline, but it's more of a event driven pipeline where you have one CI tool, another CD tool. You're doing GitOps and you're doing progressive delivery, and then how do you inject testing into all of those? I think as people kind of go down that path, they also kind of realize, or maybe they see the need to run tests, not just as part of, from a Jenkins build, for example. So I think definitely it's something it's coming, but it's interesting to follow that journey from our end, of course, because that's kind of what we're trying to facilitate with TestCube. I think one thing I wanted to ask you about is one thing that has come up in previous podcast episodes, and also when I talk to people, is about testing in production. And it's one of those things that, people say you should never test in production, but almost everyone we talk to say, well, of course, well, yes, we test in production. I think we even have had someone say, it's testing in production is the only way to test. I'm exaggerating, but that's kind of that's the place that you have to know that it has to work. I'm sure there could be barriers to that. Do you have any thoughts on that, or any experience from like testing and production, pros and cons, and when?
I don't have any direct experience being a part of this, but I've been interacting with teams here at InfraCloud or elsewhere as well, and I think a lot of them emphasize on this. And one of the major reasons is being the difference within the environment itself. A lot of times you set up your testing environment which doesn't mirror the production, and I think that that is a major concern amongst a lot of application teams across the globe. Because eventually when you have all your integrations and systems and unit tests and everything working perfectly in test environment, but it just goes off when it comes to production. And that is where I think a lot of emphasis is given to testing in production, and it may not be like 100% a test there, but then obviously something like an A/B test, or maybe when you speak about something like a progressive delivery, right? You are not testing the entire load or the entire stuff that's happening in production, but then testing critical areas that you feel that can probably go wrong. So you try to use the signals, you try to use the observability metrics that comes in from the production, and use that to refine your test, refine your application, and use some chunk on your production to test how things are happening. And then use that as a feedback mechanism to give it back to your team to understand that, hey, these are the things that eventually create a bottleneck in this type of a situation. So, even a percentage of information coming in from the production is gold, or it's very much valuable for the team when they're actually building the application in the development stage. So I've had few discussions, and everywhere teams have been moving to the phase where they want to test into production, but obviously all of them are wary about not breaking things, uh, and that's where they are getting into the whole mirroring the production. So that's where your ephemeral environments come in, for example, right, which recreates the exact production setup. You try to do a lot of chaos testing to understand how the actual real time effects can happen, make or break your system. So yeah, that's what I've heard from my discussions with people.
No, that makes sense. I mean, it obviously matters in the type of tests. So I'm guessing like penetration testing is maybe something you want to do in production because that's where you want to make sure that you don't have any, security vulnerabilities. But like massive end-to-end tests, maybe it depends on kind of like how they alter the state of your application. Chaos testing, I know some companies do in production because that's kind of where it has to work. So it's definitely, I think when you say testing, most people think functional testing, but I think there's so many different types of testing. So definitely that can be more nuanced as almost anything else. Great.
Absolutely.
Atul, it's been a pleasure having you. Thank you so much. Dmitry, do you have any last minute questions for?
Well, how about this one? Atul, if you had a magic wand and, well, the constraint is it has to be about testing, and you could wave it and solve one problem for people, what would it be?
Wow. This will take this will take I need a few seconds to think about.
That's fine. I'll come back. We'll put it in the comments.
And I think magic wand for, I think so focusing on the cloud native space we are in, right, with so many pieces, multiple pieces, being part of your infra and your application. I think if that wand can give me a complete list of various integration points that are available, what are the different modules that are involved, then it would give me a better visibility into the entire application and the infra that I have. And that's when I know what are the places where it can fail. Right, everything from my source repo to the vaults where I'm storing my secrets to service meshes and everything else that's part of it. Because I know when you have an application, I might miss out on certain things like, the repo from where it's coming in, right? Or maybe the vault that's part of it. Maybe I'm just focusing more on the service mesh or how it's functioning, or more on how the containers are being, orchestrated. So while my focus is there, I would definitely want some command where I just run it and it tells me that, hey, these are the 100 points of failures that can happen. And I just take that and write my test according to it. So that would be where I would want to use the logic code.
Okay, great. I love that answer. Thank you so much, Atul. Thanks for joining. It's been great talking to you as always. Thank you, Dimitri, for that very interesting question. And
Thank you.
thanks for everyone listening, and looking forward to talking again soon. Bye bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.